Good morning and most welcome to Jonsered, just northeast of Gothenburg. We experience a real spring day today. I think it's temperature up to the 20s during the day. Almost clear sky and the leaves are coming on. See flowers popping up everywhere, dandelions, green leisurely heaths everywhere, and horses pacing around. I will today try to make a segue once more. I found a pedagogical article to help ease the rather great difference between space and numbers. We entered into that area with geometry, which I would say is the connection between spatial configurations and numbers. There is an integral connection already at the outset of both mathematics and geometry in the ancient world of Egypt. Mathematics and geometry started as a measuring of lands for deciding who owned who and how much. The name of the article is The Integral Sphere, a Mathematical Mandala of Reality, by Thomas J. McFarlane. Abstract. This article presents a dynamic mathematical mandala which can be seen as an integral model of reality. In contrast with conventional two-dimensional mandalas, the mandala described here is a sphere in 3 or more dimensions. Moreover, through a process of breaking the perfect symmetry of the three-dimensional sphere and then projecting the sphere onto a plane, the sphere is related to conventional linear planar mandalas and unfolds their implicit archetypal structures. For example, a mandala with many similarities to Ken Wilber's four-quadrant model of the cosmos is unfolded as a special case of the spheric mandala. four-dimensional integral sphere also contains Wilber's nested sphere as a special case. Higher dimensional spheres can be used to represent additional aspects of existence. The paper also shows how the present model provides a tool for facilitating complex thinking with fundamental categories, revealing how they interpenetrate and transform into each other. Introduction. In nearly every culture, mandalas have been used as a symbolic representations of reality. Typically, a mandala contains symbolic icons which have special meaning. These symbols are arranged to show their places in cosmos. Some mandalas, such as the Sri Yantra, contain geometric rather than iconic symbols, and the spatial relationships between these geometric symbols carry the primary symbolic meaning. In addition to representing the cosmos in a compact symbolic form, mandalas are used as tools for contemplation and inner transformation. Meditation upon a mandala, for example, can reveal deeper relationships between various parts of reality and help one to attain a more integral vision of oneself and the cosmos. Nearly every mandala is represented in a two-dimensional plane. Often the plane is divided into the four cardinal directions and has a center with concentric circles emanating outward. However, some mystics have used the sphere as a symbol to express their profound insight into reality. For example, the Tibetan Buddhist Chogyal Namakai Norbu writes, total sphere is a synonym of Dzogchen. In short, what this really means is that the state of consciousness has no beginning or end and is free of limits, like an immense sphere. Similarly, the Greek philosopher Parmenides used the sphere as a symbol to express his deepest insight into the nature of reality. Being is ungenerated and indestructible, whole of one kind and unwavering and complete. Nor was it, nor will it be, since now it is altogether one complete. It is completed on all sides, like the bulk of a well-rounded wall, equal in every way from the middle. For it must not be at all greater or smaller, here or there. the Christian mystical philosopher Nicholas of Cusa also uses the sphere as the most profound symbol for God or ultimate reality. And now we go to points, page 20. The point of infinity. This point is not anything, because it is the knower of all things. It is a no thing that knows things. In contrast, anything arising in awareness is a point on the line, an object of awareness. A thing that is known. Notice that there is a discontinuity between the manifest line and the unmanifest point at infinity. No movement along the line, no matter how far out, will ever reach the transcendent point. Conversely, the transcendent point can never appear among the objects in the world. To illustrate this mathematically, a point on the line can be called the origin. And the line can be given a metric so that one can measure distances from the origin. The line then becomes a number line. Such as the real number line, where each point corresponds to a number. The origin corresponds to 0. Points to the right of the origin correspond to the positive numbers. And points to the left of the origin correspond to negative numbers. Points further and further from the origin correspond to larger and larger numbers. Just as infinity is not a finite number, the point at infinity is not a point on the line. It transcends the points on the line, just as infinity transcends all finite numbers. Because the subject never becomes an object. The uncreated is never created. It is often forgotten or ignored. The no thing becomes a nothing. The world of created things then appears to be the entire reality, leaving nothing out. The line without the point at infinity represents all of creation. But leaves out the transcendent source. It is a symbol for all form, but ignores the formless. It displays the world of objects, but forgets the subject. The linear mandala reduces reality to the finite and blinds us to the infinite. Limits us to the variable phenomena by leaving out the invariant awareness. An integral model of reality should therefore explicitly represent what transcends the linear world of objects and resist the temptation to leave it out. Although the transcendent point at infinity should be included in any complete model of reality, because it is a simple, formless point. It has no structure. The points on the line, in contrast, can be given a structure. What are the relationships between objects in experience? What different kinds of objects are there? What are their distinguishing properties? How do they behave? These questions can be given meaning when applied to the manifest world. As a result, elaborate mandalas have been developed to provide answers to these questions. We will focus here on just the fundamental and universal themes. So my comment here is looking at the point can be compared as looking at one atom. It excludes the observer, the subject. Grading the linear world. The various spiritual traditions and the perennial philosophy in particular teach that the manifest world is a graded reality. Just as the unmanifest one is distinguished from the manifest many, so the variable phenomena of the many are distinguished from each other according to their degree of reality or value. Every cosmology has some such grading, some way of saying what kinds of things have more value and more reality. For example, one way of grading things is to notice that what endures is more real and valuable than what quickly perishes. A car that breaks down and is useless a few months after it is made is not as valuable as a car that runs for many years. An experience of something unusual is more likely to be considered real if it persists day after day. What is real and valuable, in short, is what is most invariant under changes in time, place, and circumstance. Just as a grading on the linear world of phenomena requires some criterion for assigning degrees of value or reality. So a measure of magnitude on the line requires a metric for assigning numerical values to points. This metric is provided by the conventional Euclidean distance, producing the familiar real number line. The numerical magnitude assigned to each point then corresponds to its degree of reality value. The origin has zero magnitude and thus no value, while points further away from the origin have increasing positive or negative magnitude, and thus increasing value and reality. The point at infinity has infinite value. This grading of the points on the line separates them naturally into those near the origin with small values and those far away from the origin with large values. example, those points between -1 and +1 can be called gross phenomena or concrete objects. They do not enjoy much invariance and are thus least real and valuable. Those points to the left of -1 and to the right of +1 can be called the subtle phenomena or formal objects. They have high invariance, value, and reality. Note that this distinction between subtle and gross within the realm of objects reflects the primordial distinction between the infinite and the finite. This mirroring of the one-many distinction in the world of form as the large-small distinction is a symbolic representation of the principle as above, so below, which generates levels of order among phenomena. As one moves further out away from zero, in either direction, one encounters phenomena of increasing subtlety and value. No matter how far one follows the line, however, one will always be at some large but finite distance from zero. In other words, it is impossible to reach infinity in this manner. The one is the infinitely real that is entirely beyond and transcending all created phenomena, no matter how subtle. Inner and outer worlds. It will be noticed that the subtle and gross phenomena are naturally divided into two halves. The subtle and gross phenomena of the negative side of zero. And the subtle and gross phenomena of on the positive side of zero. This division of the phenomenal realm into positive and negative, or right and left regions, naturally corresponds to the other fundamental distinction within the created world. the distinction between inner and outer. And now we come to the very zest of it. Geometry and mathematics in this sense is another approach entirely of addressing the inner-outer opposition. We have inner experiences such as feelings, thought and insight, as well as outer experiences of physical objects, subtle energies, the deep order of nature, archetypal or angelic realities, and divine being. Another way of looking at this distinction is between inner modes of knowing, epistemology, and outer modes of being, ontology. The maxim, as above, so below, may also be interpreted with reference to this distinction. In this case, its meaning is that the ontological levels of being in the exterior cosmos above are mirrored below in the epistemological levels of knowing in the interior psyche. Gross modes of knowing on the left takes concrete physical entities as its objects on the right. Subtle knowing on the left takes subtle entities as its objects on the right. in general, as Plotinus states, every type of object requires the corresponding organ of knowledge in order to know it. The grand sight of Plotinus here. I'll just repeat it for every type of object requires the corresponding organ of knowledge in order to know it. Thus, while their signs may differ, their magnitudes are the same. And also a very good conclusion from the author of the article. And as you can see here, there are close connections to imaginary numbers that take a decisive role in quantum mechanics. But also the connection between geometrical forms and the outer workings of the connection between subject and object. And I do like, this is a completely new approach, very similar to David Bohm's implicit, explicit. Where the implicit is the unrealized, non-existential, unreal, imaginary, and on the subjective side of this subject-object order. The gross modes of knowing are on the right direction. The concrete physical entities as their objects of knowledge. So we are talking about different ways of knowing. And these different ways are not the same. It has been suggested many times, a different attitude gives a different world. The gross thinking is very similar to the objectified knowledge of, for instance, forehanden. And gives also associations more in the direction of the left hemisphere with its most specific attitude of fixed things, atoms, points, just as we mentioned, and not caring much about what cannot be seen. The inner, the psyche. I'm going to change a bit on the whiteboard. Maybe put a pause here. Sorry. Why, thank you. And I will repeat the Plotinus site, and we are very close here to Platonism, of course. Platonism is a Neoplatonist. But an opening up of Platonism is in place. But every type of object requires the corresponding organ of knowledge in order to know it. Thus, while their signs may differ, the magnitudes are the same. And it's very well put. It's so the signs can be completely different, despite what Saussure and Lévi-Strauss are saying. But the magnitudes are what matters. And it's more of a flexible, adjustable idea between the subject and the object. Not that fixed. Not a chiasm between subject and object, inner and outer, and small and big. This is depicted in the article by this. As you see here, where subtle, gross and subtle are connected to innerness, and of course the subtle is more in the legion of inner, and the outer is what we usually direct as the gross. So this is another way of thinking of it, that the small movements, the subtle things, are inside because they are subtle. The subtleness is the insideness in this approach. And the gross is the outer. And that is also connected to different modes of thinking and being, Stimmungen. So instead of having this sharp, or why not the slash, we have a scale-wise approach. It slowly goes this way to the gross and then it goes to the subtle. It's flexible, expandable, not sharpish. And this points also to that knowledge, in a way, is as fractal as the world. We are not disconnected from the world. Remember when we spoke about geometry, I didn't have a whiteboard, so it was very hard to depict. But it showed how numbered made up different geometrical figures. Triangle, square, rectangle, this is a deep connection between the inner subtle doings of ourselves and the outer world. a way of tapping into that. Terry Marks Tarlow says a lot of similar things, that different attitudes of understanding give different worlds entirely. They become different. I will read a quote here from Cusa that I was supposed to add earlier on. Well, Kalle can read it, I think.
Put the microphone, please.
Give us a second here. Be careful not to touch the microphone. It apparently terminates the...
And the camera, or yeah,
Yeah.
So Nicholas Cusa regarded mathematics as the best symbol for things divine. He says in De Docta Ignorantia. Since there is no other approach to knowledge of things divine than that of symbols, he cannot do better than use mathematical science on account of their indestructible certitude.
Why, thank you very much, Kalle. Very kind of you. I've learned how to remove and take away the microphone. It is in itself a skill to be learned. So the gross and the subtle is the dividing line, but it's not division in the ordinary sense, where the subject is apart and the object is somewhere else. Here, the inner and outer worlds are coming together. The mandala is a very interesting geometrical figure because it is actually fractal in its construction. Iterative, it makes the same movement as plants, living organisms, and the life force itself, the quantum field. Another feature is adding another layer. It is also mirroring the one-many distinction by being a progression. Not distinct points, but slowly ascending into many, and then descending into fewer, small numbers, down to one. And also is mention here of archetypal. Those things seem to disappear, and angelic realities and divine being in the current attitude of, let's call it materialism. These things disappears because the very sharp distinction we upheld and still uphold. It blocks understanding of greater things. And to that must be included, of course, things like knowing the future, understanding reality on a bigger scale, so to speak. maybe a comment from my colleague here. So we can do this feature again here. Weird. My fingers seem to clasp.
I do love Nicholas of Cusa. He said that he praised the curve. He regarded the curve as something divine, while we think, our intellect thinks in straight lines. That's a problem. But my question to you, Hans, how can we apply this mandala to our everyday lives?
Thank you. Very good question. The mandala, or the geometries, as we mentioned in an earlier lecture, I think it was some 10 lectures ago, they are depending on the connection of ways of knowledge, so to speak. How we know will also construct the world. So we leave a little bit the idea that everything is disjunct from us, out there, and the only way of knowing those things, I'm now pointing to a horse, you can put the horse into the frame if you want to call it.
It's the pony, but you see only the tail, I think. You should try to show the pony.
Ah, yeah.
I actually mistook it for a lion a few days ago when I first saw it.
I'm not sure you should.
Scared.
I'm not sure you should say that to the camera. But
in a different angle, the same color.
It's grand color. Thank you. But but the regular order, the mechanical reductionist order, in order to know the world, I need a measuring rod to get out and measure the pony. I need to have different instruments, and I would need some categories. I misnamed it by accident, called it a horse. I was corrected. You see that categorization is a specific way of knowing that puts everything far from us by the very mode. It's a sort of unusual way actually to know things. You might call it the left hemisphere's way of knowing, the scientific, if you like. Heidegger would call it vorhanden. This is closer to the thing. I've often repeated quote here from the son of one of the founders of quantum physics, maybe the greatest, Niels Bohr. He said, "Do not bring in existences out there. What you need to do is find out reality based on your knowing directly. Go to the source." The mandala, in its roundness, I really like the Nicholas Cusa, the roundness. It is more encompassing, taking in the subjective and the objective. And that was the point of Augie. If the subject, the observer, enters, then we can have understanding. Whereas in my little depiction here with the pony, the understanding becomes shallow, superficial. I do not really know the pony. Only the superficiality of it, not the depth of what the pony is. Comment or?
No.
So you get deeper into it. Put a pause there. And I continue. Thank you for the comments. It is significant to observe at this point that interior knowing and corresponding exterior being are both objects in the fundamental phenomenological sense, since they are both a part of the line of manifest phenomena. To be compared with a quantum reality where subject and object always enters interpenetratively into each other. Acts of knowing are cognitive events that come and go in dependence upon the entities that are known. Also very good. So acts of knowing are cognitive events that come and go in dependence upon the entities that are known. Thus, the inner empirical subject, negative values, and the empirical object, positive values, are both objects, finite values, from the perspective of the transcendental subject, which is infinity, the source of everything in this understanding. As finite in nature, the empirical subject and empirical object, the pony, are both insignificant in comparison with infinity. This accounts for the Buddhist teaching of the ultimate emptiness of both objective things and subjective selves. Neither positive side nor negative side of the phenomenal spectrum contains phenomena that have maximal reality. It is especially significant from the spiritual perspective not to confuse the empirical subject. Which corresponds roughly to the various phenomena on the left half of the line, with the transcendental subject that is entirely separate from the line. Confusing these two is a fundamental error that spiritual discriminative wisdom is designed to correct. This linear symbol also has other relevant interpretations. Extending the above considerations, as inner knowing approaches the infinite toward the left, the corresponding outer object approaches the infinite toward the right. In the limit, infinite transcendent knowing at left infinity has infinite transcendent being as its object at right infinity. These infinities, however, are not properly points on the line, but are infinitely far off, impossible to reach, and in opposite directions. From the perspective of the Mandala on the line, therefore, the Vedantic declaration, Atman is Brahman, is paradoxical. Not only is it inconceivable that one could actually reach the negative infinity of Atman or the positive infinity of Brahman by moving to the left or right on the line. But the identity of positive and negative infinity is even more incomprehensible. It is not surprising, however, that the line which separates inner and outer and assumes a discontinuous chasm between the transcendent and manifest fails to represent a teaching that identifies these opposites. Remarkably, however, we can creatively use mathematics to view this dualistic linear mandala from a non-dual perspective that overcomes these limitations. So you can now hear the goal of the article, also my telos here is to overcome the limitations of the created distinction between subject and object, to reach into the infinity. Thus, we now proceed to the second stage in our construction of the spherical mandala. The mystical theologian Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa regarded mathematics as the best symbol for things divine. And I think this quote we already took. Since there is no other approach to knowledge of things divine than that of symbols, we cannot do better than use mathematical signs on account of their indestructible certitude. For example, Cusa used geometry to illustrate the identity of the circle and the line. As a circle becomes very large, it appears less curved, much like how the surface of the earth appears flat to us because it's so large. In the limit where the circle becomes infinite, then the curvature vanishes and the circle coincides with the straight line. Cusa's correspondence between the circle and the line, however, has two disadvantages. First, it does not include the point at infinity. Second, it requires passing through an infinite process to form the correspondence. Our approach will therefore differ from Cusa's, even though it follows his basic insight that the apparent opposites of the line circle can be identified. As we will see below, there is another mathematical correspondence between the circle and the line, which includes the point at infinity and requires no infinite process. The correspondence is essentially a transformation of our point of view so that the line is seen as a circle. This shift in perspective reveals that the line, discontinuously separated from the point at infinity, is equivalent to a single continuous circle.
Uh, 1 hour and 38.
I will not go into the technicality, but we start with 2 axes and go progressively using the subtle and the gross manner, and we go over from the line, as I explained here, Cusa's understanding that the line really is a circle. Expand it, and we end up with a circle, as can be seen on page 25.
Yes.
Beyond subject and object. Now taking the circle as fundamental, we can then view the line as derivative, as arising from the circle through a process of projection. First, a point infinity on the circle is distinguished from all other points as a pure subject. He is here using the Lemniscate, which we mentioned before. Second, rays are imagined to emanate from this point, Lemniscate. Relating it with other points of the circle, representing objects. Third, these objective points are projected onto a line, representing the severing of the circular whole into an objective world of objects and a transcendent subject. This duality of knower and known, emptiness and form, arises through a process of creating relationship between 2 points of the same circular reality. The process of projecting this relationship into linear form and forgetting the point at infinity is interpreted as ignorance that hide the primordial unit of subject and object. And I have to add there, observer and observed. And as we mentioned earlier in the Klein bottle, the uncontained going into the contained in the process of containing, which is space. Remembering the perspective of the circle reveals the truth that subject and object are aspects of the same continuous whole, with no real distinction between them. From this perspective of the circle, there's pure continuity between the points on the line and the point at infinity, with no discontinuity at all. This shift in perspective, therefore, provides a symbol for the shift from the perspective of discontinuous dualistic consciousness to the perspective of continuous transcendent consciousness. And I think it's time for a summary here. And can you put the pause there? This is a grand way of showing that all lines are actually descending or are derived from the circle, which is actually true from a physical geometrical standpoint as well. But using the Lemming skate as we've seen before, when we go to infinity, this sharpened distinction between subject and object will be shown to be on the same circle. It's a continuous, it's a continuum. And I think most people, me as well, when I was thinking about this thing, I found the difference between subject and object irresolvable. And as many people in my generation, we went the Daniel Dennett Dawkins way, giving more credulence to the objective part. This is an astonishing new perspective, and very glad it's inspired by Ian McGilchrist, one of Ian McGilchrist's favorites, Nicholas of Cusa. You can see when it goes to infinity how the line slowly turns into the circle. And of course, all location or knowledge is contained here, and even more so, whereas the line cannot carry that much. The circle is, so to speak, more comprehensive. All these first, second is quotable. I will read the third take on the whole thing. I do recommend that you read it through. Third, these objective points, you can think of points, are projected onto a line representing the severing of the circular whole. Into an objective world of objects and a transcendent subject. And this is, in this extreme take, the subject is the res cogitans, the unextended thinking nothing, the psyche of nothingness, and the objective side is everything. Substantial, existential, in some form more durable than the airy respiration of the psyche. It's a most elegant way of showing how we can both have a complete understanding of knower and known, subject and object, and the difference between the emptiness of the understanding observer and form. But this is created from the circle. So the circle is encompassing both. All the information we have in the so-called regular world of reductionism is carried by the circle, but it also shows loads more knowing. And the circle is also the absolute star of fractality as well. And we can also add here, I was thinking of going into the Derrida article, that life-death is a welcome member in this club, because also this not so sharp distinction can here be put in, and you can see it as a continuum of sorts without having to have these very sharp distinctions. So the marvels of the circle. Nicholas Cusa. Maybe there's a comment from my colleague here.
Yes, of course, yes. Mark.
Yeah, put the microphone there. There you go. Okay, sorry.
I think we should write down the name of the writer of this article. I think he deserves it. I will make a stupid pun, but I may not help you to remember the name. Lane is like a narrow road, of course, but he goes against the very meaning of his name, because here he writes on page 25 in this version. Now, taking the circle as fundamental, we can then view the line as derivative, as arising from the circle through a process of projection. I think I'm very enthusiastic about this phrase. I'm not a mathematician, but I find this is fundamental. So, to apply to my own field, I'm going to erase this. So let's see, the two New Testament manuscripts. So you see, let's suppose you have an original manuscript here. So, and then you have early manuscripts, which are copies of this. So we have lost this, of course. Early manuscripts, and then you have later manuscripts. And then you can have more early manuscripts here, so forth. And there is always linear thinking going on, like this, and they go into the early manuscripts. Then sometimes these, so to say, to put them correctly, we should say, let's say they are here, let's say late manuscripts. They can be less reliable, so to say, if you get my point. So the thinking is very linear. But if you understand what he says, that the line is derivative from the circle, so it could be instead like this. Go to the late manuscripts. So reality is circular, not linear. I think this is a very exciting insight. For all discussions in humanities is more or less linear. We suppose that is the correct way of reasoning. But this paper by Thomas McFarlane challenges this view. Hans, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, it's just I am as enthusiastic as you are. I know this for some time, but all circles could become lines depending how you turn them, and all lines are actually derivative from the circle, which is more fundamental. That's the origin, so to speak. And I think these people don't have a choice. They don't know about this. This is an opening up. So you can keep all the distinctions you want, before, after, but they will go into something larger, more encompassing. And all of a sudden you can see a connection that is quite different. And I would say this carries a lot more information. I have always seen Jacques Derrida and Heidegger as circular thinkers. People who intuitively understand the foundational place that the circle has. And when we are fixated on the linearity, we lose out on that. We think that all distinctions are going to disappear. But the circle is an invitation that it is just the opposite. More is reachable through the circle than the very linear and ordered line. So yeah, it's great. Thank you very much. And it was me, I wish you all, it's almost end of the morning, but still morning. I wish you a very pleasant morning. And see you next. Bye-bye.
Thank you, thank you.